From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capitol Chats.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a WisPolitics Capitol Chats episode brought to you by Spectrum. I'm Adam Kellenhofer, a reporter at WisPolitics.com. Today, I'm joined in the office in Madison by my colleague Kate Morton to talk about an interview that she just did with Wisconsin Legislative LGBTQ Caucus Chair Senator Mark Spreitzer. He is a Democrat from Beloit. So, Kate, what did you and Spreitzer talk about, and why do the interview this month?
Well, Adam, as some people may know, this month is Pride Month, so I took the opportunity to talk with Senator Spreitzer about some of the caucus's priorities. We talked a little bit about some of the legislation they've already introduced to help the LGBT community and some things that they're planning on introducing. We also talked a little bit about discussions around a potential conversion therapy ban and conversations that he's had with Republicans about that.
All right, well, let's just get right into it.
So, Senator Spreitzer, thank you for joining me today. I just want to start off with talking a little bit about some of the priorities for the LGBTQ plus caucus this session. If you could maybe share that with us.
I'd love to. The Legislative LGBTQ plus caucus has been meeting and talking about legislative priorities. A number of these are bills that we've introduced in past sessions and want to reintroduce, and we're also working on some new things. Generally, we've got a number of symbolic resolutions celebrating things like here in June, Pride Month, also Transgender Day of Visibility, Transgender Day of Remembrance, Intersex Awareness Day. We had a resolution recognizing the life and public service of Dick Wagner, who was a leader in the LGBTQ community who passed away. So things like that. And then we have our more substantive legislation, bills that would actually change state law. And I would love to share what those are about. So we've got two bills related to marriage equality. They haven't been recirculated yet this session, but they will be. One is to remove the state constitutional amendment that bans same-sex marriage that was passed in 2006. That has been unenforceable because of Obergefell, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that legalized marriage equality nationwide. But certainly we saw some of the conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court in the Dobbs opinion on abortion suggest that they would also like to overturn marriage equality. And if that were to happen, the language we have in our state constitution would come back into force. So the legislature needs to put that back on the ballots and give voters a chance to actually repeal that. And then at the same time, we have a bill to update state statutes. So there is actually a statute that defines marriage as one man and one woman. We need to rewrite that. And then there's gendered language that is throughout our marriage and parental laws, referring specifically to husband and wife rather than spouses, or mother and father rather than parents. And so we're trying to go through and just update each of those instances to be gender neutral wherever possible, to reflect the diversity of families that exist here in Wisconsin. We also have some legislation specifically targeted at protecting rights for the transgender community that's been in particular under attack. So back in 1982, Wisconsin became the first state in the country to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation. But we didn't at that time ban discrimination based on gender identity and gender expression. And that leaves transgender and non-binary folks without the same legal protections. And even though we believe that our current ban on sex discrimination should cover that, that requires going to court and making that argument. And we want to be very clear about what we mean. So there's a bill that we'll be putting out once again to update our non-discrimination laws to fully protect trans folks and non-binary folks here in Wisconsin. And then we're looking at what we need to do to go a step further to actually make sure that when folks are looking at changing their name or their gender markers on official documents, whether that's a birth certificate, a driver's license, that is easier to do, that we get rid of some of the burdensome requirements currently in the state law, like having to have surgery, which some people don't want and other people want but can't afford, and making that process a little bit easier, and also providing gender neutral options for people who identify that way to put on their official documentation. We've got a bill that has already circulated and been introduced, eliminating what's known as the gay and trans panic defense. This sort of was pioneered, unfortunately, by the people who murdered Matthew Shepard. They claimed that they, essentially panicked because he was gay, and that's why they killed him, and that should somehow excuse them for murdering him. And we haven't seen that used successfully as much lately with gay victims, but we've increasingly seen people try it with transgender victims now. And so we want to make very clear that the fact that someone is gay or bi or trans is not a defense for attacking them, and that is not a defense that someone can use in a courtroom here in Wisconsin. And then the issue that's probably gotten the most attention this legislative session is banning conversion therapy. We are working, and this one I'm really hoping will be bipartisan and that we can actually get it done this session. So we're working with Republican colleagues to try to find a path forward here to ban conversion therapy for minors. This legislative session started out with an administrative rule that was put forward by social workers and other therapists to, within their own profession, ban conversion therapy under the administrative rules. And Republicans, unfortunately, blocked that in the legislature on the Administrative Rules Committee. And they actually introduced a bill to prohibit banning conversion therapy. We want to do the exact opposite. We want to introduce a bill to actually ban conversion therapy. And we've had some positive conversations with Republican colleagues about looking to try to get that out this fall and hoping that it might actually get the support needed to move forward.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about the conversion therapy discussions. What has the feedback been exactly from your colleagues? And I guess, why is this something you think some people have sought to protect?
I think some of my Republican colleagues find it really important to make a distinction between minors and adults. They think that if an adult person wants to seek out conversion therapy, they should be allowed to do that. I happen to not agree. I think conversion therapy is discredited, and if we're talking about licensed mental health professionals, we shouldn't allow licensed mental health professionals to do a harmful, discredited practice that is not justified by healthcare, medicine, science. But that's the line that my Republican colleagues want to draw, and if we can get their support to at least ban this for minors when it's going to be most harmful, we certainly want to try to figure out how to move that forward. The other line that is already drawn by the legislation and by the rule, but that Republicans find important, is making sure that this only regulates licensed mental health providers and not other people such as clergy or other non-licensed folks that somebody might go to and talk to about their sexual orientation or gender identity. Again, I certainly think that counseling someone to not be themselves is harmful in all cases, but I certainly understand that the government has a much stronger role in regulating licensed mental health professionals as opposed to trying to get into the realm of people's religious practice or other belief. And so I think we're looking to put forward a bill that regulates licensed mental health professionals and bans them from practicing conversion therapy on people under the age of 18.
Okay, well, it sounds like there might be some compromise there. I'm curious to hear, I think some of the other bills you mentioned had been introduced in the past. What have the discussions been like across the aisle on those measures?
Unfortunately, it has mostly fallen into two categories of inaction from our Republican colleagues. One is on some of the issues related to marriage equality. I think what I hear from some of my Republican colleagues is that they personally are okay with marriage equality, but they view it as a settled issue and they don't want to have to stick their necks out and take a public vote that might be uncomfortable with some members of their base. And so, maybe we could revisit that conversation if marriage equality were actually overturned at the federal level, but they're not really interested in having that conversation right now. They sort of feel like, hey, you won at the U.S. Supreme Court, why do I have to go vote on it? And I've been hearing that basically for 8 years now. The other broad category is the bills that are specific to the transgender community. I think a lot of our Republican colleagues, even who are relatively okay with gay folks, still aren't there on trans folks. And unfortunately, we've seen them not just not support our bills, but actively introduce bills like last session's bills related to youth sports that would specifically harm the trans community and bar trans people from participating in public life consistent with their gender identity. And so we've got a lot of work to do, not just here in Wisconsin and not just in the legislature, but I think, if you look around as a country right now, to educate our colleagues, to educate our community members about what it means to be trans or non-binary, and how we can be fully inclusive as a society.
Okay, I'd be curious to know, is there any legislation that you've seen introduced so far this session that causes you or the caucus concern related to the community?
Mostly we're concerned about legislation that we expect to be introduced, but that hasn't yet been. So I know Speaker Voss and Representative Dittrich have both indicated an intention to bring back those bills that would bar trans girls and women from participating in women's sports. Certainly, we find that incredibly harmful, and we were glad that Governor Evers' veto ensured that wouldn't become law last session. We know that also won't become law this session because Governor Evers would veto it again. But it's still harmful to even be putting that out there and sending that signal to young people that they aren't welcome. So we expect that to come back. It hasn't yet. I've heard rumors that other anti-trans bills may circulate. We've certainly seen other states do a tax on trans health care. Here in Wisconsin, back in 2015, we saw a bill to ban trans people from using the bathroom that matches their gender identity. Don't know if we'll see that bill come back. The longer they don't, the better. So, I'm perfectly happy that none of those bills have been introduced at this point in the session, but I fully expect that some of them will. And then, we're also watching on things like book bans. So there was a bill introduced that certainly doesn't go as far as some of the book bans that we've seen in other states, but that kind of starts to operate in that space and to try to regulate what books are and aren't on the shelves. And obviously, we want libraries, especially school libraries, to have age-appropriate materials. There's nobody who I think disagrees with that. But it's also important to be able to talk about things like sexuality and gender identity in an age-appropriate way, and to have materials that represent diverse families. And as soon as you start to see people wanting to regulate books from a certain moral perspective, there's a concern that it ends up trying to ban LGBT books.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, is there any new legislation that you're maybe considering introducing to, protect the LGBTQ community or kind of address the related issues with the community?
The biggest new legislation that we want to work on is related to updating official documents that I mentioned earlier, making sure that we don't have that surgery requirement, and that it's a relatively easy and private process for people to update their name and their gender markers on their driver's license, state ID, birth certificate, things of that nature. We continue to tweak our bills as we move forward and find different areas that need to be addressed. So one of the things that has taken on increased importance is making sure that student groups are protected, GSAs or other similar student groups that meet, and making sure that our schools are required to treat those groups the same as any other student group. And so we're updating our comprehensive non-discrimination bill to make sure that it explicitly references groups like that, to make sure that LGBTQ students have a safe space to meet at school and to support each other.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Kate, thanks for that interview. If our listeners want to read more about Wisconsin Capitol issues, they can head over to our website at wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Adam Kellenhofer.
I'm Kate Morton.
Thanks for tuning in to WisPolitics Capitol Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.